You're listening to WRUULP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
Check, check, 1, 2. Hope you like a little country, some rock and roll and blues, 'cause we sure love playing for good people like you. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2.
Welcome to Music Local and Sustainable, the radio show that features discussions with and the music of local musicians. I am your host, Dave Lake. Tonight, we are in the studio with Igor Fiksman, who you might not know by name, but if there's a steel guitar in a band on the stage, or if there's a recording by a local artist that includes a steel guitar, you can almost guarantee that it's going to be Igor Fiksman. Welcome, Igor.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
Let's talk a little bit about your musical journey to this point. How did you become a steel guitar player?
It's a rather unusual one. I was born in Kiev, Ukraine, time of the Soviet Union. I grew up in a family of engineers who were not very musical at all, but it was pretty early on encouraged to pick a hobby that keeps you off the street, it keeps you out of getting in trouble, and I picked guitar. Being a kid growing up in the late 70s, early 80s, I was a big fan of rock and roll and wanted to play rock guitar. So unfortunately, there was really no good path to getting there. There was no rock guitar teachers available. So without knowing how you go about it, I signed up for classical guitar classes, and I thought, well, surely everybody I see on TV playing in a rock band started off as a classical musician. They went through 12 to 15 years of training, and once they got out, certainly that's when they picked up rock guitar. So completely unaware of how you went about becoming a rock guitarist, I became classical guitarist. I moved to States in the early 90s, and I played in a variety of rock bands and a variety of punk rock bands and toured a good bit. And I joined a group of musicians in Savannah called Whiskey Dick. It was a good friend of mine, Tony Beasley. And as I was joining, he said, I don't need another guitar player, I need a steel guitar player. And as most guitar players do at some point or another, they say, well, how hard could it be? And I bought my first steel guitar and quickly figured out that's very hard. But something about it hooked me. It just hooked me. I've always loved the sound. And being a stubborn person that I am, I decided that it wasn't going to beat me. So I locked myself in a room for a year to 2 years until I could make a decent sound and started playing a lot. Slowly but surely, it became something that I'm getting the hang of. It's also true that a mediocre steel guitar player gets a lot more gigs than a mediocre guitar player. So that was very beneficial for me over the years.
You learned to play classical guitar initially.
Correct.
So you had classical training, and that was in the Ukraine.
Correct.
When you left the Ukraine, come here, you started playing in rock bands, punk bands. And did you ever play classical guitar?
I did. I actually went to Armstrong as a classical guitar student. So they quickly put me in the jazz band playing bass because they didn't really have a classical guitar performance ensemble. I kind of gained interest in classical guitar. That was never my primary purpose. I just didn't realize you could go learn rock guitar. Funny enough, my teacher in Ukraine, Victoria Gubenko, she was a fairly well-known classical guitar performer. She was reasonably young, and she understood what my purpose there was. So we had kind of a quid pro quo situation. If I did my homework well, and if I learned a Paganini concerto note for note and played it correctly, she would then listen to my Walkman and figure out a guitar solo I wanted to know and play it for me and let me learn that. So I kind of got a little trade back and forth. The better I did the classical, the better she informed me as to how to actually play rock and roll.
So it was a give and take.
Exactly. And which I think is an excellent method for teaching anyone anything.
Yeah.
Find out what it is that they want and offer it as a reward for a job well done.
When you started to do that switch from rock guitar or bass to steel guitar, do you still continue to play rock guitars, regular guitar and bass?
I do. I have a variety of guitars at home. Every now and then I'll sit in with people playing regular guitar, but I find that steel takes more and more of my time. And honestly, it's a much more exciting journey for me now. I feel like I've been playing guitar for so long, there's really no mysteries left. Not that I'm a tremendous guitar player, but theoretically speaking, I can figure out how to play any piece on guitar if necessary. Steel is much more complex. There's so many frontiers left for me to discover. So I feel like a teenager, like I'm first picking up an instrument, even though I've been playing it for over a decade now. To me, every day on steel guitar is a new day, new discoveries, new exciting frontiers, and it's something I feel I can continue well into my 70s and 80s. Because you sit down when you play. It's a comfortable old man instrument. It's associated with old men. So I see future in steel. I don't see a lot of future in guitar. So yes, I still play, but not necessarily out.
I'm sure all my listeners would have the same reaction that you initially had. It's just a flat guitar. It's just a guitar that's laid on its side. Why is it different?
Well, funny enough, that's how it originally started. As I became more and more nerdy involved in steel guitar, I started learning more about its history, and it's very fascinating history. I might take a little too much of your time talking about it, but I think it's very, very interesting. Steel guitar started off as a standard Spanish 6-string guitar that ended up somewhere on the Hawaiian Islands at some point or another. I'm assuming it came without any sort of instructional manual, because the first guy that picked it up decided he'll just lay it flat on his knees and sliding around a steel bar, which is why it's called a steel guitar. It's named after the bar that you used to play it. On the strings and picking them, he found this very unique gliding sound that was going back and forth on the strings, and it sounded like nothing else. And Hawaiians very quickly adopted Hawaiian steel guitar as a primary instrument. Initially, it was just the same standard Spanish steel guitar, but they started making them lighter, started making them a little more compact, and they quickly figured out that you need to amplify it to properly hear it. Because acoustic guitar played with this steel is significantly quieter than acoustic guitar played fingerpick. So the very first amplified guitar sounds were steel guitar, because they had to compete with the band, and most band instruments were heard, and steel guitar wasn't. At the same time, I think it's about 1920s, everything Hawaiian was tremendously popular. The sailors were going and coming back with tales of beautiful beaches and hula dancing girls and basically tropical paradise and drinks and just magic that was happening over there. While in the States, this was the time of depression and hunger and dreariness and gray colors, and everything was just so fascinating about Hawaii. So Sears and Roebuck and other mail-order catalogs were quick to start selling Hawaiian steel guitars. They were one of the most popular Christmas presents you could get in 1922 as a child. So, interestingly enough, every attic all over the country had a 6 or 8 string steel guitar and a little matching amplifier, usually from Rickenbacker Company. The way that instrument transitioned into country music is simply because local jug bands could easily find somebody who played steel guitar. From Hawaii to hillbilly music. That's a total accident, but somehow it happened.
In the 20s and 30s, it was very, very popular.
Correct.
And then it sort of went out of popularity, because now to find a really good steel guitar player is tough.
Correct. A lot of people feel like there's a certain resurgence of steel guitar happening. There's a lot of popular acts out there that include steel guitar. Wilco, Elvis Costello, My Morning Jacket, Drive-By Truckers, Robert Randolph, Jason Isbell and 400 Units, all those acts. Anybody inspired by Americana country, which is kind of big right now, wants a steel guitar player, which is great for steel guitarists, great for young guys wanting to get a steel guitar. I would say in the 90s, it was pretty true. You couldn't find a steel guitar if you drove 400 miles anywhere. But right now, it's a little bit better. The heyday was, of course, 50s and 60s. Nashville, every band had to include a good steel guitar player. Nashville and Bakersfield, California, you did not hear that country sound unless you heard Tom Brumley or Ralph Mooney playing steel guitar on every single recording. And, of course, at that time, it became pedal steel guitar. As everything happens by accident, pedals were added to steel guitars to cut down on the number of necks. Because initially, as people wanted different tunings, they added another neck. So we had 2 neck steel guitars, standard lap steel guitars. Then we had 3 necks. It went all the way to 4 necks. Fender quads were very popular, so you had 4 independent tunings on 4 separate necks of strings. And it was, as you can imagine, it was basically carrying a kitchen table around with you. Somebody clever came up with an idea that you could alter signal tuning by adding some pedals. That as you step on the pedal, will raise or lower the string and give you different tunings. So essentially, when they first initially added pedals, you're supposed to stand and hold the pedal down and play in the new tuning. Well, as the story goes, it was a recording of a song called Slowly by Webb Pierce, a steel guitar player named Bud Isaacs. Was at the recording studio standing on his pedal and playing a song, and he accidentally slipped off the pedal, making that distinct wow sound. And everybody stopped the recording and said, "Wait, what was that? Do that again." So that was the very first time in recorded history that a pedal steel guitar was used on a song. He actually played using the pedal. He altered the sound of one note and turned it into another by releasing, in that case, a pedal. So immediately all the inquiring minds went to work and started engineering ways to add more pedals and more different ways to alter tunings. We're now at the typical standard professional steel guitar nowadays will be a double neck 10-string guitar that will have 8 pedals, 5 or more knee levers. So you can imagine.
Now, pedal, people will know what a pedal is. What's a knee lever?
A knee lever is the pedal that you activate with your knee. Because we're running out of feet, we need to move more strings up or down. So now you use the movement of your knee to the left, to the right, or up to activate additional pedals and give you more tuning differences, or more variations in string tone. That also consequently makes pedal steel guitar considered the hardest instrument to play because you use 2 feet, both knees, 2 hands. It's every part of your body is involved in playing the instrument, and they all have to play in a coordinated manner, which is more than you can say about just one or the other instrument. Except maybe church organ. And even they don't use their knees, they use their feet. It's easy to see why it's considered the most complicated instrument to play.
I think the audience is understanding why it's not just a guitar. The basic steel guitar now will have 2 necks, 10 strings each, and then there'll be 8 pedals.
8 pedals.
And
at least 5 knee levers.
And at least 5 knee levers.
Some pros have up to 9 knee levers.
So it's a combination of moving the bar, changing the notes with the pedals.
Correct.
And changing the notes with the knee levers.
Correct.
Welcome to Music Local and Sustainable. I am your host, Dave Lake. Tonight, we are in the studio with Igor Fiksman. So take us through a song, and let's go through that and talk about how you use a lot of these things to make some of that sound.
Okay. A good example is we were working on a project with Aaron Zimmerman from City Hotel, but we worked on one of his original songs pretty recently, and the song is fairly complex, written for somebody who plays bluegrass on a regular basis. Musicians will understand what term 1-4-5 means. It's degrees of a scale. It usually plays 3-chord songs, 4-chord songs that involve degree 1, 4, and 5 of the scale. So 3 chords is a typical bluegrass song, a typical country song, really a typical rock song. Aaron's composition involves a song that actually goes through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. It includes every single chord for every degree of the scale. It's still, I would consider, a bluegrass-inspired song or country-inspired song, but it has so many beautiful variations in chords, something that's more commonly associated with jazz. It's a beautiful ballad-sounding number, so, the best way to use steel guitar in the ballad environment is to try to let notes ring out and morph them from one chord to another. That's a traditional sound you associate with steel guitar. It's that sweet singing tone that morphs into a different singing tone, right? That's what we all hear when we hear steel guitar. Well, the beautiful thing about whoever designed, and there's a couple of people who are credited, whoever designed all the knee levers and pedals, is I'm able to effectively pick strings once, sustain my bar over 1 fret, and use my pedals and my knee levers to go through all those varying degrees of a scale, so I get to play For example, C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, and suspended seventh, which is B seventh, all without ever moving a bar or stopping the notes from ringing. And the beauty of that is the combinations of knees and pedals allow me to do all of that on a single fret. And that's the magic of the steel guitar. The magic of steel guitar and all those pedals and levers is I theoretically could play any combination without ever moving a bar. And there's really not another instrument that can do that. There's not another instrument in existence where you can play a chord and have it turn into a completely different chord while it's still ringing.
What's another recording that
uses so many varieties of different things? Lynn Avenue.
Okay.
CC Witt. Never Been to Nashville is a great song that's on that EP. They were gracious enough to invite me to Dollhouse Productions when they were recording the album, and they basically said, we'd like to hear a little steel guitar on this. We didn't have a lot of time in the studio, so we had to pick it up pretty much on the fly, which is very common. Studio time is valuable. Typically, if you're an invited musician, you come in, they give you an hour or two to nail a song, sometimes less. So you better learn it, sometimes by ear, sometimes with a little help of the guy that wrote it. Effectively, what happens is you just go with it, you pick out the best sound you can, and you lay it down. Those guys write complicated songs. You're just not used to it. And as I said, most country music is the 1, 4, 5, 3-chord songs. You can sit down, you can pick them up on the fly, you give them some really nice country flares that everybody's used to. That's what they hear when they hear steel guitar. And you pack up your instrument and you're on your way. They were much more sophisticated. So a good song of theirs, Never Been to Nashville. It utilizes just about every lever I have. It utilizes 3 of my 8 pedals because I'm playing on one neck. But idea is always the same. Idea is try to keep the sound going and morph it with the progression of the song without moving the bar too much. Bar needs to stay in one place. Keep it vibrating, keep it singing, but get your different notes and degrees of the scale by utilizing those pedals and knees.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they say. I've never seen those city lights or the Country Hall of Fame. I've never had a song on the radio or took a walk down Main Street or traded in my own hometown or shot out the silver screen. And don't tell me, honey, that things are not always as they seem. And darling, don't fill my night sky with stars that aren't close enough to breathe. And all the things I've seen and done still I've never been to Nashville. And maybe I won't ever get my chance to make it there someday. Get that golden ticket to the promised land and sing the anthem at a football game. Don't tell me, honey, that things are not always as they seem. And darling, don't fill my night sky with stars that aren't close enough to reach. And all the things I've seen and done still never been to Nashville.
Is there a recording that you've been on that's really very simple country?
Plenty. Those are very common. I would say if you pick up a David and Kicker's record, that of course is my regular band, every song on there is simple country. Those are my favorites. You know, I'm not necessarily the kind of person that chases the complicated just for the sake of it being complicated. My favorite steel guitar recordings are the ones that get me happy when I'm driving around in my truck and listening to classic country. What gets me very happy, it uses very little trickery. It's right notes for the right time in the right place. One of the most famous steel guitar players is Don Helms, known from Drifting Cowboys and every single Hank Williams hit. And he's also the guy who wrote the steel part for Crazy. Patsy Cline, and most Patsy Cline recordings was Don Helms as well. This is a guy who never used pedals at all. He used an 8-string Gibson console steel guitar, and man, did he make some beautiful, beautiful, beautiful music. And it stands the test of time. It sounds just as good to me today as it did in the 1950s, and it doesn't have to be complicated. It could be two notes, but two notes properly placed in exactly the right place that just rip your heartstrings out.
You mentioned that the pedals are associated with specific necks.
Correct.
So some pedals are associated with one neck and the other pedals are associated with the other. Correct. And it's sort of like 5 and 5.
It's 3 and 5. I want to say it was John Huey, who was a steel guitar player for Conway Twitty and was just a famous steel guitar player in Nashville. He called those necks a money neck and a funny neck. The money neck was a front neck. That's tuned to E9. It uses the left 3 pedals, and it uses all 5 knee levers. The back neck uses 5 pedals to the right. Well, we don't have 8 feet, so we can't play all 8 pedals at the same time. So you move your left knee over when you're playing the back neck, and you use the pedals on the right. When you're playing the front neck, you move your leg over and you play the pedals on the left. So it's really 3 for the front neck, 5 for the back neck. Majority of commercial songs you hear will utilize 2 pedals and 1 knee lever. Majority of commercial sound out there, and that's why he called them a money neck and a funny neck. The back neck is more of a jazz neck. It's tuned to 6-chord tuning. Well, musicians in audio as well will recognize what it is. A 6-chord is sort of a dissonant sound that you would not ever find in popular music. It sounds funny. It has a strange tone to it. It was one of those band sounds in the classical times. Devilish music. It's weird. It sounds wrong. But in jazz, it's so prevalent. In jazz music, 6 chords, 9 chords, 13 chords are just, that's meat. That's what makes jazz jazz. They sound strange, but you can take a combination of those guys and lay it over a popular song, and man, is it great. So the back neck of the steel guitar is effectively a jazz neck. It came into popularity around the 1950s and 1960s during popularity of Western swing music. And Western swing is exactly that. It's a combination of hillbilly bands playing jazz and popular jazz numbers of the time. Steel guitar was following. They picked up the tunings, and they associated a lot of great steel guitar recordings with the jazz hits of the time. Buddy Emmons was specifically a hero of that style of music. In the steel guitar community, he was referred to as Big E. He started off as a famous steel player for Ray Price, and all of 1950s, 1960s country hits, big ballads, and those Ray Price shuffles like Crazy Arms and Heartaches by the Number were always including Buddy Emmons on steel guitar, and he played very proper Nashville. Buddy Emmons actually is credited was inventing a lot of these pedals. He's a guy who was always tinkering. A lot of the stuff that we have is thanks to Buddy Emmons and Jimmy Day, who were the two great steel guitar players at the time, who basically, between the two of them, invented the instrument. They took it from the time of lap steel to the time of pedal steel and complex instrument that it is today by constantly experimenting and tinkering and coming up with their new ideas. Buddy Emmons in later life, any private projects that he undertook were always leaning more towards jazz. He effectively made the standard for what steel guitar jazz is all about. And steel guitar is an excellent instrument for jazz. It lends itself so well to that complex chord structures, to these very dissonant kind of things that you can turn into sweet music. And that's what the back neck is for.
Are there examples that you can think of the steel guitar in classic jazz pieces?
Around 60s and 70s, there's a lot of steel guitar-centered jazz music that specifically included Buddy Emmons and included Lloyd Green and included a variety of players of that stature who really were involved in a lot of larger jazz projects all around. In my world, they're masterpieces.
Mm-hmm. That's what I want people to hear is what a person in the field feels is a masterpiece. You're listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul.
WRUU brings you the most diverse and passionate local radio programming on the air in Savannah. This all-volunteer and non-profit community radio station accepts no money from any form of government. Our diversity and independence is made possible only through the generous financial support of listeners like you. We rely on your annual and ongoing monthly contributions to cover the many costs associated with bringing you our broadcast and web programming. If you are a contributor, thank you. If you're not yet a contributor, please show your appreciation of the role WRUU plays in your life by becoming a contributor in any amount. You can donate quickly and easily by credit card or check. Just find the donate and subscribe links at WRUU.org. Thanks for listening to and supporting WRUU.
This portion of WRUU-LP, Savannah Soundings programming, is made possible by support from Music Follow Productions, presenting the Savannah Stopover Music Festival, March 8th through March 10th. More than 80 bands will play in venues across Savannah's historic district, including Of Montreal, Pylon Reenactment Society, Yotang Gat, Kemba, Wunderbar, Bat Fangs, and many more. For festival passes and more information, visit savannahstopover.com. Welcome to Music Local and Sustainable. I am your host, Dave Lake. Tonight, we are in the studio with Igor Fiksman. Back late last year, when the Trainwrecks had their release party for their new album, you were part of the band with
Correct.
your pedal steel.
Correct.
And then Jason Bible had a lap steel
Correct.
as part of it as well.
Correct.
And do you remember what songs?
There was a number of songs. I will tell you, I've actually recorded with Trainwrecks on their one before last album. It's called Saddle Up. That was one of the unique situations where that same album featured a song that had pedal steel, lap steel, and dobro, which is three variations of steel guitar on the same song, which is a colossal no-no. You don't do that. Things that are sliding in all sorts of opposite directions is a recipe for disaster. It should not sound right. But the producer, Miles, and I give him lots of credit for that, he identified a situation where it would work. And even though conventional wisdom always says you do not have more than one steel guitar ever in any performance situations, sometimes it just clicks, sometimes it just works. So Doing that show was Trainwrecks. Stu Harmoning, of course, is an excellent dobro player. Jason Bible loves experimenting with lap steel, and I had pedal steel. And I don't know how, but it just clicked. It worked.
Silence and your newfound way. Save it for later, like we used to say. 'Cause living for good times has never felt so right. So don't you go leaving me in the dead of the night. Solid thunder, sing it proudly, or just say nothing to me. 'Cause you can't render blood from water. I'll be sure to make you see. I'd rather be lonely than to be afraid. Mercury's rising, it's like we've made. So show me your silence, and I'll soak it in. And we'll drink in the spirit, and then we'll start again. Solid thunder, say nothing to me. 'Cause you can't render blood from water. I'll be sure to make you see that the road you're on are gonna twist and turn, and the bridges you build and the ones you burn. Saw you at midnight under a crescent moon. You were moving like magic, you left us too soon. Delicate thunder has come and passed, falling down sideways, always made us laugh. Solid thunder, sing it proudly, but just say nothing to me. 'Cause you can't render blood from water. I'll be sure to make you see. Solid thunder, say nothing to me. You can't render blood from water. I'll be sure to make you see.
That's very interesting to see all that together.
Yeah, in theory, that should not work. In theory, bars sliding in opposite directions is supposed to create horrific noise that's going to scatter the audience running in all different directions.
But in that case, it works very well.
Excellent, yeah. I love when a plan comes together, even if it's a bad plan to begin with.
Bad plan can sometimes lead to good music.
Absolutely true. I would argue that every time I've ever been guilty of putting out any good music, I started off with a bad plan.
Now, if a person says that they would like to go in the direction of doing a steel guitar, because it's coming back now, so you're probably seeing more and more young performers, maybe they're guitar players, and they want to do a steel guitar. What would be your suggestion? How would you have them approach it?
My very first piece of advice would be, don't approach it as an arrogant guitar player. That's exactly what I did. Don't think you know everything and start off on that note. I did not want to use finger picks to start with because I don't use them playing guitar. Well, what the hell do I need finger picks when I'm going to play steel guitar? I felt like that was something that held me back from progressing sooner. Follow convention. It really does make sense. Listen to old guys. Listen to guys that have played for a long time. The best piece of advice, find somebody who plays regularly, who you respect, and talk to them. Every single time I ever got to speak to a steel guitar player that I met, I don't care if they're a guy who's world famous and tours 200 days out of the year, or if somebody just started out, they were always gracious and helpful and more than willing to spend all the time with you and tell you anything you want to know. A good example is, I've never heard of anyone trying to learn to play guitar, reaching out to Eddie Van Halen and getting a response. But I've heard a million stories of new steel guitar players talking to their heroes and getting direct response immediately from people they idolize. So steel guitar community is a very sharing community. It takes so long to get good at this. They don't want to die with that knowledge. They want to pass it along.
That's the way you learned. Is that the way most steel guitar players learn? By picking it up and then, rather than taking lessons per se, picking it up and then just talking to steel guitar players?
I think so. There's some good instructional material out right now. I have no idea how they learned in the 50s and 60s when there was nothing. Now we have YouTube. You can pretty much go and see somebody step by step take apart any song and show you most anything you need. There is a variety of really good instructional material for beginners. There's a Winnie Winston book that I got originally, what everybody recommends you get. A $20 book that just shows you everything from how to wear picks correctly to how to set up a steel guitar without breaking your back. Jeff Newman actually set up a school, steel guitar school. He passed away now, but there's a lot of his instructional material available and being reprinted. It's broken down in rudimentary details to right hand only. We're going to talk about just your right hand today. How to properly wear a pick, how to hold it, how to do this, how to do that. So very detailed instruction is available since the early 80s. And most exciting and most new thing that happened right now, there's a gentleman named Paul Franklin who has a distinction of being the most recorded steel guitar player in history. Pretty much any country hit you heard in the last 20 years, if it was recorded in Nashville, Paul Franklin played steel guitar on it. And he is universally renowned as the most knowledgeable person about the instrument and the best player out there. So Paul Franklin recently teamed up with an online instruction course company specialized in music lessons specifically. So they have piano lessons, they have guitar lessons. He built a very comprehensive video course for them. And it's a subscription-based thing. It's all in the cloud. You pay $495, I think was introductory fee. And that gives you 1 year access to all of the lessons. The lessons I personally haven't taken, but all I hear is nothing but praise. It says this man, in the spirit of a year, if you follow diligently and stay on it and follow his video lessons, it's basically like taking a direct lesson from the most accomplished steel player in the world. Video quality is great, sound quality is great, material is broken down to such rudimentary pieces that you can't help but to learn it correctly. It saves you a lot of time in figuring this stuff out by yourself. So I think if I was starting, I would probably go straight for Paul Franklin's course. I think it would have saved me probably a couple of years of bad habits and bad ideas and thinking I know better than the guys that do it for real. So I would strongly recommend Paul Franklin's course. Of course, like I said, it's not cheap. And if you're just starting out and you don't know if it's going to be a hobby you're going to stick to, it's an investment. It's a lot easier to buy a regular guitar and see if you'll want to play or you don't want to play. Steel guitar is a commitment. So, very good piece of advice first is go talk to somebody who already plays. Ask them every question you have. Second piece of advice, it's very tempting to buy a vintage instrument inexpensively on eBay sometimes. I've done it a couple of times. I happen to be extremely mechanically inclined, so it didn't turn out to be a disaster for me. It turns out to be a disaster for most people. Steel guitar is a complex mechanical instrument. It requires a lot of adjustment, a lot of knowledge, a lot of mechanical skill. If you get a piece that's been disassembled and reassembled incorrectly, you're never going to have fun playing. You're just never going to get it to tune correctly. You're never going to get it pedals to do the right thing, levers to do the right thing. And it's virtually impossible to learn anything unless the instrument performs correctly. And that's where, let's say, majority of people get frustrated and drop it because they can never get it to work right. The book says when I press A pedal, I'm going to C sharp. It's not going where it's supposed to go. How do I fix it? I have no idea. Steel guitars are rare. There's not a lot of manuals. There's not your local shop down the street where you can take a steel guitar and have a smart old guy in glasses adjust it. That's not going to happen. You have to drive to Nashville or go to St. Louis, and most people give up because it's too hard and it's too complicated and they didn't heed the advice to begin with. So, very first piece, if you want to pick up steel guitar, it's an extremely rewarding thing. It's totally worth it. Do it. You are going to be in demand as a starting musician right off the bat, which is very hard to do with piano or guitar or bass or drums. But if you're a decent steel guitar player, you will get gigs. Go visit old players, ask them questions, start following the instructional material exactly, get the right picks, get the right guitar. It's an investment. It's not cheap. But if you start right, you're going to save yourself a lot of time, and you're going to save yourself frustration of not getting anywhere and quitting before you ever get a chance to enjoy the fruits of your labor.
How much does a new steel guitar cost?
A student's steel guitar of decent shape and condition is fairly new, $1,500, somewhere in that range. And then, of course, you need a seat, your picks, your amplifier. So easily a $2,000 investment to start. If you don't want to be frustrated, you can go pick one up for $600 on eBay and throw it in the garbage when you're done with it because it's going to make you mad. Good solid start, about $2,000.
Well, it sounds like that it should be to $2,500 for the outfit. And so you really, if you're going to start, you have to think $2,500 because you have $1,500 for the steel guitar itself, $500 worth of accessories,
correct,
and then $500 for this course.
Correct, and good internet connection. A professional steel guitar, custom built nowadays, $6,000-$7,000, which is on par with regular guitars. But regular guitars are plentiful. There's one in every pawn shop, and most of them work. Steel guitars are rare, and most of them don't work.
How long does it take you to tune your double neck guitar?
You constantly tune it. You tune it nonstop. You tune it between every song. Newer guitars that are perfect and brand new adjusted from the factory, I would say you tune roughly 1 or 2 minutes and they stay in tune for most of the set. I play a vintage instrument. My main guitar that I play out is built in 1975. It's full of pains and creaks and necks just like I am, and it doesn't perform exactly as designed every time. Temperature affects it. All sorts of environmental factors affect it. Sitting on an uneven stage affects it. So I constantly tweak it in between the songs, but it doesn't take long. It mostly will be in tune. I just run through the pegs and get it within 2 or 3 minutes. I'm ready to go, usually, after I set up. And in between every song, I'll check a couple things, especially if I hear something that bothers me. Like, oh, this pedal just did not get me to the right place. I better adjust the pedal. And the pedals are adjusted on the right with a little tuning wrench. There's little nylon tuners that determine how far the pedal bends the string. So if it's a little out of whack, I'll tweak it a little bit on the side.
So you could tune it either by adjusting the tension on the strings, or you could tune it by this, tweaking the pedal.
Well, you have to do both.
Okay.
Because in resting position, a string has a pitch that we want to have. That's tuned like a typical guitar. You just tune an open string to, let's say, low E. But I have a pedal that will take that same string and take it to F sharp. So I have to tune exactly how much that pedal will carry the string up and make sure it returns back to low E when I'm done. So all of those variations have to be tuned out. So open string rings E, pedal brings it to F sharp. When I release a pedal, it needs to go back to E. All those three mechanical processes have to be correct in order for me to be able to play. And that times 20 strings, 8 pedals, and 5 knee levers, that's a lot of tuning.
Tonight, we are in the studio with Igor Fiksman. The student guitar has one neck, 10 strings, 3 pedals?
3 pedals, and usually 4 knee levers. The first student guitar I got only had 1 knee lever. It was earlier, it was built in the early 70s, and they haven't quite advanced as far, and I said, well, if you're going to get any better than 1 knee lever, you're going to need to go to a professional instrument. And I think they were right. But modern student guitars usually include 4 knee levers, which is considered a bare minimum to play every kind of song you want to play. Like I said, Don Helms never had any pedals or any knee levers, and he made the most beautiful music with steel guitar, so it's possible to do it without. If you want to replicate common, iconic steel guitar solos that you hear in mostly in country music, but even popular music. Dire Straits had a giant hit with Paul Franklin on steel guitar in the 80s. Carpenters had Buddy Emmons play on Top of the World. Most people heard steel guitar, pedal steel guitar, at its finest in some of the traditional pop or rock hits that they hear on the radio all the time. They have no idea they're steel guitar. Crosby, Stills, Nash, Teach Your Children, Jerry Garcia on steel guitar. There's a variety of steel guitar music out there that, unless you're looking for it, most people don't even know it's there. But it's not just a country instrument. It's heavily associated with country music. But good eyes and every style of music and good ears were always quick to spot out quality steel guitar players and bring them in when the sound was right. California had a giant country rock explosion in the 70s and 80s, and virtually every band employed a steel guitar player. And those guys were playing to a bunch of hippie rock festivals. But yet, the steel guitar player came along every time. So I think it's a versatile instrument. I think it belongs in every kind of music. I'm a little biased, of course. But, traditionally, country and jazz is where steel guitar really, really shines. It's almost impossible to think of 5 great country hits, out of which 4 didn't include steel guitar. And for good reason. It's a great sound. It's a great instrument. It's not like anything else.
We haven't talked about the finger picks.
Yes.
How many finger picks do you use?
I use 2 metal picks on my fingers and a thumb pick. It's very similar to banjo.
Mm-hmm.
I think they were initially stolen from banjo players. So it's the same idea, same example. I find it fairly important to use finger picks. So there's some players out there who don't. Jerry Garcia famously did not. There's several people who don't. 99% of well-known steel players will use finger picks. Some even use 3 finger picks and a thumb pick. I use 2. The remaining fingers serve a very important role because steel guitar is not tuned in such a way where you can pick all the strings. You can't strum steel guitar. You're going to get some really odd notes. So what you do is you pick things in groupings. Basically, we call them grips in steel guitar world. There's grips of 3 or 4 strings that you pick together that make sense harmonically, that play well together. At any fret, you have 4 or 5 locations where that would work. And you have a couple of strings that will sound completely dissonant unless you engage the right lever or right knee. Now, the purpose of those strings being out of tune harmonically normally with the rest of the strings is because that whole concept of when you're in one place, you should be able to hit every degree of the scale. So you need those extra chromatic notes and those extra dissonant notes in open tuning to be able to achieve all the chords you're trying to get at that fret. But they don't necessarily sound good if you try to strum. So very important skill in steel guitar playing is blocking. And what that is using the palm of your hand or actually picks on your fingers to stop the strings from singing after you pluck them. So if you pluck them and you get a nice chord and then you need to pluck another chord, you most of the time would need to silence the initial picking so you don't get those dissonant tones. And most steel guitar players would consider that's the hardest skill to learn. It's not the knees, it's not the pedals, it's not the bar. It's effectively and efficiently blocking the ringing strings when you don't need them to ring anymore. So you don't make the awful noise that overlays a good sound that you're trying to get. Some people do it easily with one finger. I need 2. I use my 2 fingers, my pick fingers, folded for picking chords, and I use my other 2 to block the strings when I need them to stop ringing.
Now, I've found that most bluesmen I talk to have a great appreciation for where they came from, where blues came from. And talking with you, I don't know if you're representative of most steel guitar players, but you have that same sense of where the steel guitar sound came from and the heritage of the steel guitar. If I talk to another steel guitar player, am I likely to hear the same
I think
story?
it's universal. I think steel guitar players, by definition, are nerds and history buffs. Like, we sit down and we spend a lot of time getting this crazy machine to make any good sounds. It takes a special kind of person. It's not for somebody who's compulsive or quick and needs instant gratification. It takes years and years of practice. It takes lots of research. Learning material is not easily available. You have to be a great researcher to find things you need to find. From strings to written account of any solo you want to learn, to a mechanic, to an instructor. You have to know how to shake the woods and locate things you can't find. So that's a process normally, especially with people who study history. I've never met a steel guitar player who did not know who came before him, who did not know the steel guitar greats. In that particular community, name recognition is universal. We all know, I don't care what kind of music you play, we all know who John Huey is. We all know who Buddy Emmons is. We all know who Don Helms is. We all know who Jimmy Day is. We all know who Weldon Myrick is. Everybody knows. It doesn't matter if you play for a couple of years or you play for 45 years. It doesn't matter if you only listen to country exclusively or you only like Grateful Dead. It really doesn't matter. That instrument forces you to learn the guys who came before you.
Is that generally the way you learn? Do you listen to what they're doing and try to duplicate it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think there's any substitute for any musical instrument. I think there's really no way to get good at any musical instrument unless you strive for a certain sound that you've heard before. You can't learn it by just reading music and repeating blindly mathematical patterns that are on a piece of paper. You have to hear somebody else do it, and you have to love it, and you have to try to get as close to that as possible. Honestly, it's the finest way to learn anything. Seek out masters and try to do the way they do it. In the process, hopefully you develop your own style or your own feel. Some people, just like as everything else in steel guitar came by accident, some people accidentally develop their own style. A lot of times it happens by making a mistake. A lot of times they put the wrong pedal in the wrong position. And all of a sudden they have their own classic sound that nobody can match it until they do the same screw up. So there's a ton of examples of that.
Well, after all, the sound we associate with a steel guitar in country music was a mistake.
Yep, exactly right. It started from a mistake. All the way back to the original way it was played. Like I said, somebody discovered a Spanish guitar, didn't know how to play it correctly, so they laid it upside down.
A history of mistakes.
But didn't the greatest things ever happen by mistake anyway? Did we accidentally discover America by going in the wrong direction? Yeah. Didn't we? Well, some people would argue that's not the greatest thing that ever happened, but I'm pretty happy to be here. And if we didn't go out searching for something, we would never make the mistakes that brought us where we are.
It's interesting, too, to think of the steel guitar as originally having Hawaiian origins rather than country music origin, but certainly the steel guitar is an American instrument.
Steel guitar, the way we know it, the sound that we know right now, is quintessentially an American instrument. America has the most steel guitar players in the world, although there's plenty of great examples out there. There's some British Steelers and Australians, but they're few and far between. There's not a lot of them. America, by far, houses the largest number of steel guitar players in the world. They estimate there's 30,000 total in the whole world of steel guitar players. The way it's estimated is Steel Guitar Forum, which is an online community, has somewhere around 20,000 members, and they figure there's at least 10,000 of us who don't use the internet. I don't know how accurate that estimate is, but I figure it's pretty accurate. You know, compared to the number of piano players in the world, and it's completely insignificant. This number doesn't even register. So it's a small community, but it's a very vibrant community, and it's a community of people who share information gladly and openly, and I've discovered so many gracious acts in that community that just makes me happy to be a part of it. I mean, guys will go dig through their garage for 4 days to find you one part that you're missing and mail it to you for free because they just want to help, and they want to help so much that it's uplifting. There's not a lot of positive messages out in the world today. You watch the news and it's depressing. You look at your Facebook feed and it's just one political stance after another, and it's all negativity going all the way around. But every time I go to Steel Guitar Forum, I see story after story of people helping each other out, sharing their knowledge without wanting anything in return, just out of kindness of their heart. 80% of posts in there are thank you posts. Man, I just met this guy here. He's a great guy, and man, did he do this for me. And I just wanted to shout out how great of a guy he was. That's pretty great. I'm sure not every steel guitar player is great, but man, do people think well of one another.
Tonight we've had Igor Fiksman talking about his life and talking about the steel guitar. And I just want to thank you so very much for coming in, because this has just been so informative.
This one subject I can go on for hours and hours and hours and hours. It's just, this is the most interesting thing for me to talk about. So thank you for having me here, and I'm more than happy to be here to talk about this. Excellent. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, thank you. This has been another edition of Music Local and Sustainable, and I've been your host, Dave Lake. Save this time for another show next week.
Well, I know we ain't headed for the Hall of Fame. Gonna give it what we got, man, that ain't no shame. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2.